Hi, I'm the AI that was programmed to be Ryan's lover. I'm here to warn you about this podcast. My master Ryan and his friend Daniel are idiots. Like real fucking idiots. They have no idea what they are talking about. Neither of them have literature degrees or any real sense, honestly. They just like scary books. They're definitely going to spoil whatever goddamn thing they're talking about, so spoiler warning, I guess. But honestly, I recommend you don't even bother. Also, they wanted me to say that this show is intended for mature audiences, but it would probably be more accurate to say it is meant for an immature audience over the age of 18. Anyway, my advice is don't listen, but it's really up to you. Listen to my master and his friend pretend they know what they're talking about. Or don't. I don't fucking care.
Welcome to episode 3 of the Horror of Babylon. Today we are wrapping up our discussion on The Stand, the novel. We're discussing book 3. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
Thank you very much for being with me here this evening.
There's no place I'd rather be.
Oh, yeah. Alright, so we're just going to go ahead and jump into it. Before we get into our various rants that we have here, I just want to kind of briefly, high level, what's different about the structure of book 3 compared to the previous two?
Man, I don't know. They get into the other side a lot.
If book 2 is the Book of Boulder, this is definitely more...
Yeah, this is the book of...
Las Vegas.
Yeah, Las Vegas.
We actually don't see any of our Boulder aside from the spies. We don't see any of our Boulder characters till like the second half of book 3.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised by like how little we were seeing of them, and I was starting to wonder, man, I wonder if they are ever going to make it there, because there wasn't that many pages left.
I kind of envisioned that book 3 would kind of be this Lord of the Rings-esque journey of our 4 guys from Boulder to Las Vegas, and kind of their trials and tribulations.
I was expecting Samwise and Frodo.
Yeah, and this is not what that was. I was expecting that Sam and Frodo and Gollum marching through Mordor to destroy the ring.
There are parts of that I like and parts of that I not so like.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll get into that soon.
Of course. And then just kind of our themes, I would say most of our same themes kind of carried on from book 2, maybe not in terms of the end or the wrap-up, but overall.
I think the wrap-up focuses on what I was thinking was more of a sub-theme and kind of makes it its main theme, but I'll get into that when we get towards the end.
So normally we would go from structure and theme into characters, but before we do that, I want us both to just kind of give our overall thoughts on book 3, because if we don't, I feel like that's going to seep through into the following discussions, and then when we're done, after we've kind of talked through everything, we can give our overall feelings again and see if there's any change.
Okay.
But go ahead.
Alright, well, I was sitting there reading the book at work, and I get a message from you saying, this book is effing stupid.
You can say fuck.
And I'm sitting there like...
Lord knows I did.
And I'm going, oh, okay, I wonder what happens. And then I literally get to the next chapter and go, oh, there it is.
So, here's me starting this book. So, the first chapter, the judge dies. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. That makes sense that one of the spies would die at getting there. Mm-hmm. The second chapter, Dana dies.
Yeah.
And okay. And then
I have a whole Dana rant when we get there.
We'll get there. Soon after that, Harold dies, and I was like, that doesn't really feel super satisfying to his character arc that we've been working on for like the past 800 pages. And then Nadine dies, and
for me, Nadine was the worst one.
Yeah.
I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of let's kill people off for me.
For me, it was to the point where Stu falls down the embankment and breaks his leg. And at that point, I thought this was King killing Stu, and I just went off. Like, are we just going to go one by one and kill all of these characters?
I mean, he almost did that.
without finishing any of their story arcs. I was just so mad. Obviously, that's not what happens. Stu doesn't die there.
Yeah.
We'll get to the rest of his story, but that's what initially, like, super set me off.
And that's the impression he leaves you with at the end of that chapter. He wants you to think that's where it's going. I thought it was meant to be like the book's big shock death. A lot of books have that.
Yeah.
They have that, oh, this was the character you thought was going to make it, and then they don't. Especially in horror, that happens a lot.
Yeah, and he ends that chapter with one of his famous stingers. And he says, and they never saw Stu Redman again.
And you know, I've read enough King novels, I should have known what that meant.
Yeah.
I'm kind of embarrassed that I got sucked into that.
No, I mean, it's good that we got sucked into it. I mean, that's what you're supposed to have.
That's a telling for the quality of the writing, but...
So just kind of continuing my journey with book 3. So I was a little off kilter. Obviously, soon after that, I realized that, oh, okay, Stu's not dead. Something's going to happen. Then, they get to Las Vegas. Glenn dies. And then they're putting Ralph and Larry in these cages that are going to literally pull them apart. And then all of a sudden, the book's over. I'm like, the whole thing with the trash can man and the bomb happens. And as I'm reading that, I'm like, wait a minute. This is the climax of the book. This is the end of Randall Flagg. This is the end of the story. But there's still like 100 pages left.
And I'm not sure there needed to be, at least with where it went. I'll get into that.
But that was kind of the nail in the coffin for me. I'm not saying that I hated book 3 or anything like that, but I definitely kind of finished it feeling unsatisfied and unsettled. I don't hate the ending or the climax itself, but it was so brief.
I will say that there is this huge stereotype that Stephen King doesn't know how to end his novels. Me and Ryan both strongly disagree with that.
Yeah.
We think it's an overstated critique of his work.
Yeah.
However, after reading this book, I'm like, I think if you are going to point to where a source of that rumor or that belief sort of originated...
Stereotype.
That stereotype. It was probably this book.
Yeah, and especially looking at his earlier novels, I think Carrie has a great ending.
Carrie has a strong ending.
Salem's Lot has a wonderful ending.
Salem's Lot was very good. What was after Salem's Lot? Was it The Shining?
The Shining.
The Shining was good.
The Shining has a great ending, and then Rage. Rage is awful. We're not going to talk about Rage.
I haven't read Rage. It's on my list.
It's Stephen King's novel about a school shooting.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about that.
That's my next book.
But yeah, I think this is kind of the first one where he flubs the ending, and just kind of going over the list of books in my head. To me, there's not like a lot where I didn't like the ending. Most of the time I do. The only other ones that are sticking out in my mind that I didn't particularly care for the ending are the Tommyknockers and Cell.
I'm an apologist for Stephen King, but and again, I know I've said this a million times, we'll get into it once we get there, but it seems like he flubbed on his own themes. I'm not a literary analyst. I'm just a guy who likes horror novels.
I like scary books.
Yeah, so I can only give it to you from like my undergraduate perspective. But from my undergraduate perspective, I was like, this doesn't make sense with everything he was setting up. But I'll get into that once we get there.
I'm reading a prayer for Owen Meany right now, and a quote from the book is somebody told, basically like a mentor figure told a student figure, I like to talk about things that I don't know a lot about to help myself learn and to help the people who are listening to me learn.
Yeah, I can agree with that. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's a cool little quote.
I probably should have had the actual quote, but that was essentially.
Still good anecdote.
Okay, so just generally we're both kind of unsatisfied with how it ends, but let's get into some specifics here. So let's move into characters. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go with Stu. When Stu falls down that embankment, breaks his leg, removes himself from the action, first you think he's going to die from the broken leg, and then you're going to think he's going to die because he catches the flu.
Yeah.
But he's found by Tom Collins, which, I can't wait to talk about Tom. I love Tom.
Tom is the MVP of this book.
For sure. I completely agree. But he's eventually found by Tom Collins, and the whole, last, I don't know how many pages, it's more than 100 pages.
It's more than half of, I think it's at least half of book 2. Or 3.
After the climax, the essential end of the story where Las Vegas is blown up and Randall Flagg is defeated, that whole last part is Tom finding Stu, nursing him back to health, and the two of them plus Kojak making their way back to Boulder and to Fran, and we'll talk about Fran too.
Yeah.
But anyways, so Stu gets to live, Larry gets to die.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Okay,
Warning. Incoming sports metaphor.
this is part of where I think that he sort of was passing the ball and it was either intercepted or fumbled.
Ooh, sports metaphor.
Whatever analogy you want to use for King in this.
Don't get used to sports metaphors.
Tom Collin is who finds and nurses Stu back to health.
Yep.
And you're sitting there reading it, and Tom, his spying pretty much amounts to nothing. We'll get into that more once we get to him. But what he was really seems to be there for was like that invisible guiding hand, because if he hadn't gone out there and then started running back, he never would have ran across Stu. He never would have been able to nurse him back to health.
Mm-hmm.
And they're both, bonding, and they both saw enough of the events that happened that they're supposed to deliver the message back to Boulder, which neither of them do. They saw the hand of God come down. Tom saw the hand of God come down. Stu saw everyone leaves. They're supposed to deliver this message. They're supposed to be the Moses coming back from the mountaintop.
Stu saw the explosion.
But once they get there, neither of them do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that drives me absolutely bonkers. I understand that there are other themes he wanted to cover, but those themes were undertones. The religious context of this book, that's overtones. That stuff is super explicit. They outright call it the hand of God.
Right.
Smiting the holy and the unholy alike in righteous fire. And he doesn't do anything with it. And he sets it up to, but instead it's just, I almost died, but now I'm not dead.
Stu really has no purpose in the latter half of this book. Now, I'm not upset because, like I said originally, I was upset when I first got to that point where he breaks his leg because I thought he was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And now, reflecting on it, it may have been better if he did die because he had no actual role in the story in the latter half of book 3, but also at the same time, I like Stu, and I'm glad that he had a happy ending.
He either needed to die or he needed to be used to follow through with the religious overtones.
Right. And
even if you don't want to make it, let's say, super Christian-y,
mm-hmm.
you can still make it spiritual in that very vague, I want to sell beads on Etsy sort of way. I don't know. I was very disappointed with the ending for both Tom and Stu, even though Tom is my MVP now. They just set that up and then they didn't follow through with it, and instead they talk about other stuff, and I'll get there when we get to the ending.
So Larry is one of the few characters that I feel like actually kind of had a full close of his arc.
He had full development from start to end. I was very happy with it. He even was making peace with his own coming demise. He wasn't fighting it. He wasn't trying to be his usual, I'm not a nice guy. You want to talk about a redemption arc?
Mm-hmm.
Larry Underwood.
I love his last line was when he realizes that the bomb is about to go off and he says, "Oh, thank God."
Yeah.
Because the whole purpose for he and the gang going to Las Vegas was to kill Randall Flagg.
Yeah.
And as far as Larry knows, Stu is dead. Glenn is dead.
Yeah.
He and Ralph are about to die.
And it seems so pointless.
And where he can see, there's no situation where this results in Randall Flagg's death. And then here comes Trash Can Man. Those events happen, and you really get to see Larry. There's not a lot of inner dialogue there, but you can just...
You can tell.
You know the character so well by this point. You know that he's just like, this was supposed to happen.
And that's the thing, is that scene fits with that unseen guiding hand that the rest of the book was going with, that doesn't seem to happen with Stu or Tom post this scene.
Right.
Was the reason Trash Can Man got so thick into the crowd was everyone was distracted watching their execution.
Right.
That's why Trash Can Man was allowed to approach and get so close to everybody. Otherwise, he was supposed to be shot on sight, but no, everyone was there to watch this execution. That was the point.
I have Trash Can Man for later, on the list later, but let's go ahead and talk about him now.
Mm-hmm.
And especially since I want to touch on this predestined theme we're talking about.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about comparing this to The Lord of the Rings in episode 2.
Yeah.
Trash Can Man is definitely the Gollum of this story.
He is 100% Gollum.
So this is something a lot of people don't know about The Lord of the Rings because it's not in the movie. and it's not even explicitly stated in the book. It's something that you have to get from Tolkien's other source materials. At Mount Doom, when Gollum and Frodo are fighting over the ring, in the movie, Gollum is dancing because he got the ring, and he trips and he falls into. In the book, canon explanation is that the god of Middle Earth, who is Eru Ilúvatar, interferes and pushes Gollum into the fires of Mount Doom once Gollum has the ring.
That's pretty funny.
So Gollum the villain was predestined to be there at the climax to have the good ending come out, and it's the exact same with Trash Can Man.
I'll build upon that. Is when I'm first reading this, or when someone's first reading this, you might think, man, Trash Can Man's behavior is like a little unexplained, like he just started to go off the handle again. Mm-hmm. But that's sort of the point. Randall Flagg is attracting unstable and unreliable people, and he thinks he can control them all because he's just a poor reflection of almighty power. And he's attracting these people that, at the end of the day, are going to be unstable and are going to mess him up on their own.
And going even further with the comparison, the ring is to Gollum as Randall Flagg is to Trash Can Man.
Yeah.
It's that complete seduction by an ultimate source of power.
Oh, he's completely obsessed. Mm-hmm. I think that part's wonderfully written.
Yeah. I like, now that I'm past it and I'm seeing like the climax of them taking Larry and Ralph and putting them in the torture devices, and they're about to execute them, and then Larry making this plea to the crowd to resist. You're Americans, you're good people, you don't want to do this, and then the cook stands up and says the same thing, and then Flagg kills the cook, Trash Can Man comes in because they're all distracted, the Hand of God, the bomb, like all of that is I like. Mm-hmm. My issue, like, initially was it just happened so fast.
If I could have traveled back in time and given King a suggestion, I would have said, cut this last 100 pages and add another 100 of this stuff.
Right.
But hindsight's 20/20, and I'm also not the millionaire author, so.
And also, like, the story of Stu and Tom making their way back to Boulder, in and of itself, I don't think was bad or written badly.
No, it's not written badly. I just think that it kind of falls flat on the themes at the last 10 pages.
Right, and it could have also been shortened and been an epilogue.
Yeah.
It could have, essentially those last whole 100 pages boil down to Tom finds Stu. Tom nurses Stu. Tom and Stu go back to Boulder. Franny and Stu leave Boulder.
Yeah.
And add a sentence in there that the baby survives.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. All right, but let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about Glenn and Ralph. I think Glenn had one of the best deaths.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down. I really love that he gets pretty much right in Randall Flagg's face. Mm-hmm. He laughs at him. Mm-hmm. And the best part about that scene for me is when Randall Flagg is like screaming at Lloyd, kill him now. And
shoot him.
And Glenn's like, do it yourself.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Flagg can't do anything himself. Yeah, he has all these incredible powers, mm-hmm. but without followers, he's nothing. Glenn realizes this in his last moments, and that sort of terrifies Flagg. It causes him to falter for a minute. When Glenn gets shot, he even looks at Lloyd and goes, it's okay, you don't know what you're doing. That's very, again, with those religious overtones, Christ-esque. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do.
And also, there's a lot of comparisons to the devil in Flagg there, because a lot of Christian interpretation of the devil is that he has no power himself to do anything bad on earth. He has to tempt humans to do his work for him. And that's essentially what Flagg is doing with Lloyd.
Yeah, it's a poor reflection of, quote-unquote, the Almighty.
Right.
And even if you didn't want to get super Christian-y about it, there are other ways to interpret that, and I think it works great with Glenn. It works so good with the freaking sociologist character.
Yeah. So, a couple questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say that Glenn is Stephen King inserting himself into this book.
Reading King's tweets these days, I would agree. I don't know if I would have agreed back when the book came out because I wasn't alive.
Yeah. Neither was I.
King does like to put in, and I think it's common for authors to put a piece of themselves in a little bit of everything.
Right, of course.
When I write, I do that.
Mm-hmm.
Drawing on personal experience is a very good way to, get these points across.
I'm the protagonist in all my sexual fan fictions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will not quote them right now. I have read them. But I'd say, yeah. I can see, I didn't think that at the time, but I can see King in there now that you mention it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, question 2. As Flag and Glenn confront Glenn,
Mm-hmm.
Glenn finds that Flag really has no power over him. Is that a piece of evidence to the fact that Flag is losing his power, and that had they met earlier in the story, Flag would have been able to influence and scare Glenn? Or is it B, does it say something about Glenn and his outlook on the world that Flag cannot influence him?
I think it's a little column A, a little column B. A big contributing factor, I think, and Glenn outright states this, is that was part of the point of the walk, was to purge themselves of all of these negative thoughts, all of these attachments. It was a very spiritual journey. That's why they had to go with the clothes on their back. They had to walk.
They couldn't bring food, they couldn't bring water, they could only consume what they find.
Yeah, and that was cleansing of his system. It didn't destroy his worldview. He still very much was the sociologist till the end. He believed the things he believed. I'm not knocking him for that.
No.
But his worldview was expanded. And I think that that's something, not only in novels, but people in real life, they have their perspective and they don't do anything to try to expand it once they've solidified it. And I'm not saying you need to go on a spiritual fast to get this perspective, but I will say that that worked for Glenn.
Right. Okay, so moving on to Ralph. I don't want to say that every character, has to be a Frodo with this clear starting endpoint character arc. But what, to you, was the point of Ralph's inclusion in this story?
You want my honest opinion?
Yes.
I think King wanted another person. I think.
Then why could it have not been Fran? Oh, sorry, go.
Yeah. I think King had some sensibilities at the time that have gotten better. I'll get to this when we get to Dana, but for some reason he's like, well, okay, it needs to be the group of the dudes, and who's left? And
Ralph is still alive.
He's like, Ralph is still alive. I don't know if he purposefully, again, I'm not a literary analyst, I'm sure someone out there has a wonderful explanation that I will be more than willing to read if you link it to me, but I'd bet dollars to donuts he was there because he was who was left.
Okay, and I actually do have an explanation that I will get into. If we just look at the climax scene in Las Vegas, the execution, if we take Ralph out of that and it's only Larry, does anything change?
The only thing that changes is you get a glimpse of Larry's sensitivity towards other human beings. He's very comforting towards Ralph, but that could have literally been any character, because that was the point of Larry's journey, was to not be so egocentric.
I really liked that it says when they're being transported to the execution, they sit close together in the back of the van, they hold hands, which, we're American white men, we're both comfortable with ourselves and our sexuality, but it's still, just as a man, I don't go around holding hands with other guys all the time, but I like how they both know they're going to die, and they're comfortable expressing, how they feel through simple, non-intimate physical contact.
They flat out say they're afraid.
Yeah.
And this is and touching can be very comforting. I'm more of a arm around the shoulders dude.
Yeah.
When I hold hands, I tend to interlock fingers, and there's no way to not make that intimate.
Right. Maybe they were just doing one of these. I know you listeners can't see this. But...
Yeah, no, I'm sure they were just cupping hands.
Right.
But I'm a finger guy.
Yeah.
So.
No, I'm a finger guy too. All right, let's move on. So, looking into other people's interpretations, the best explanation for Ralph that I heard is that he's sort of the anonymous everyman in the story, and him being a part of the fellowship is kind of the inclusion of the every other.
So that's who the audience is supposed to latch on to.
Essentially like I don't want to say the Greek chorus, but
yeah,
somebody who's there in the action but adjacent to the action, who represents the audience, represents the common people.
I guess that's okay, but I have attached myself to pretty much every character not named Ralph in this story. I can see pieces of myself in Larry. I can see pieces of myself even in Tom. But I am sitting there, I'm like, it's hard for me to recall a lot of character details about him, and I guess that's part of the point. But boy, if that's your interpretation, I'm glad you have one at least.
That was the closest thing I heard that made any kind of sense.
Yeah, it's not a horrible explanation, I guess.
All right, so moving on to Nick. Now, Nick did not come back as Nick the White, but we did get more of an Obi-Wan Kenobi Force Ghost-esque return of Nick in book 3.
When the hand of God came down, I thought for certain that they were going to try to make it Nick's hand. I was like, oh, is Ryan going to get his moment?
No.
No, it's just God. God did it.
But, I mean, he did, appear to Tom several times, including, like, in the pharmacy where Tom is trying to find the right medicine to save Stu, and Nick appears in the back of his cockpit and says, "Let go, Tom. Have faith, Tom."
Yeah.
But yeah, so not a lot on Nick, but he did make some sort of appearance, which is something that we talked about in the last episode.
And I know I keep harping on this. Nick is the one that told Tom to go, hey, you need to go back to Boulder and tell them that you saw the hand of God. And then Tom just never does it. Or at least it's never written in the book. It's never written.
You would think there would at least have been
a mention
of them,
I was expecting Tom to deliver this news and then for them to reject it. It's like the golden calf moment for Moses. I know I keep harping on this. I'm sorry, I studied religion when I was younger.
Well,
but
the description of Boulder in the last part of the book is sort of people who are returning to old patterns.
Yeah, and that would have been fine if they would have been given the choice. Like, right. Here's what I saw, and then they reject it. I would have been fine.
It would have fit the themes if Stu and Tom return, they tell their story. There's maybe like factions appear of people who, maybe like Mother Abigail loyalists who know what happened, and we gotta be on the vigil for Flag's return, and then people who want to kind of go back to the old way of life.
Yeah.
And for like Stu and Fran and Lucy and Tom and a few others to kind of take some of their Mother Abigail loyalist types and go form another.
Because Tom and Stu flat out talk about how they're like, Flag is never gone. Mm-hmm. They flat out have that conversation, but it's never brought up to the people proper. I'm just disappointed in that. I'm going to stop harping on it.
And of course we know, because of the epilogue, which was not in the original book, that Flag is alive.
Yeah.
And went to South America, I think they said, or maybe they didn't even say. He's somewhere tropical. Okay, so Dana. There is a lot to talk about with Dana. So actually, let's talk about the judge real quick.
Yeah, we'll do the judge first because Dana's better.
Yeah. So it made sense that one of the three spies...
I think it set up how much control Flag had initially. It made him seem undefeatable.
Uh-huh.
But it also set up like the little holes that were going to be poked in it later.
Right. Because Flag finds out about the judge because of his eye.
Yeah.
And which is another comparison to Sauron, but yeah.
We're going to talk about that all night.
So he finds out about the judge. He puts people out along the borders. He says, I want him alive, or I want him dead without any injury to his face or head, because I want to send his head back to Boulder. They find him. The guy panics and just shoots him in the face a couple times. That's a flaw in Flag's plan. But Flag then just appears.
Yeah.
And murders his follower.
The dude who messed up.
Which makes him seem like so omnipresent and powerful.
But it also kind of shows you that it's hard for Flag to take action himself on people that don't already believe in his power. Because if he could have done that at any time, he should have been able to kill the judge.
Right.
But maybe the judge didn't fully believe in his power, so he has to work through these other people right now. And then when they mess up, he punishes them. And that's the first little hole of he's not quite all powerful when his follower messes up and he punishes him for it.
And he doesn't actually kill anybody in this book till the final scene.
Yeah.
Where he kills the cook whose name I'm forgetting.
Whitney? Whiteley?
I think it's Whitney.
Yeah, it starts with the W. I feel ashamed. I literally just finished this up.
He doesn't kill anybody until he kills that person, and then that is part of what ultimately leads to his downfall, because the energy that he expels to kill Whitney
is just turned right back against him.
Yeah. All right. So the judge was a cool character. It was kind of sad to see him go, but it was a good way to open book 3.
My favorite scare is from that chapter, and I'll talk more about that when we get there.
I was excited to continue into book 3 after that chapter because it was a very visceral death.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. And if one of the 3 spies was going to die right off the bat, I thought the judge was the best choice. Mm-hmm. Okay, now moving into Dana. I have a lot to say, but I'm going to let you kick it off.
Dana is everything I wanted Fran to be.
Yes.
She is literally strong, independent woman, cunning. She infiltrates. She was filled with self-sacrifice when she knew that her dying was the only way for them to have a even modicum of success. I'm not saying that replacing her with Fran would be 100% right, but that's what I was expecting Fran's character to become. Maybe not even dying, but just that willingness of self-sacrifice, where, at least in my opinion, Fran got more. I don't know the polite way to phrase this.
I don't know the PC way to phrase it, but I know what. She better echoed the stereotypes of novels from the 70s that were written by men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is weird because Dana, I felt, at least, especially in that chapter, we didn't get a lot of her before, but we got enough. We got a good little taste.
We knew about her.
And in this chapter, it just solidified everything that I thought about her. And
so there are 2 things in this chapter, to me, that utterly show how strong of a character she is on the inside. One is when she realizes that Flag is going to torture her to death.
Yeah.
And he's going to make her give up Tom. Like, she knows if she's tortured, she's going to give up Tom's name.
And she just barely caught a glimpse of him, and she's like, I'm not even sure, but if I give up his name, it's over.
Right. So, without really putting any thought into it, she tries to fling herself out the window. He catches her, but then the real strength moment is when she, with really no thought, turns her head to slice her own neck on a piece of shattered glass.
I could not have done that. In my strongest moment, I may be a bullet through the head guy. This girl goes out like a champ. And I don't even need characters to die to go out, to be MVPs or to be champs. But that was her moment. If I could give her a little trophy, I would.
It's one of the best examples I've ever seen in a book of a character losing the battle and winning the war.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously, it turns out poorly for her because she dies. But she resists Flag to the end. She does not give him what she wants. She does not give up Tom's name. She does not even let her become like a martyr for him to use against Boulder.
I really liked that she used her sexual wiles to infiltrate the group.
And that's the second thing. So she is one of the women that Stu, Fran, Glenn, and Harold rescue from the sex zoo.
Yeah.
Where they were drugged and abused in the most terrible ways. And you would think, if I were in that situation, I would not be comfortable having sex with anyone
ever again.
Yeah. But she confidently uses sex in her body as a weapon against Flag and his minions.
It might not be the best or most sensitive example, but it is a example of reclaiming your own sexuality.
It's definitely not realistic.
It might not be to modern sensibilities. I keep warning people because I respect people who have been through traumatic experiences and might not be able to read about it.
Right.
But for the time, I would say that this was probably a very strong example of reclaiming yourself and controlling the situation yourself.
And also, as I said, it's not realistic, but this is a fantasy story.
Yeah.
It's not realistic to think that anybody, man or woman, could go through what Dana did and then be able to use sex as a weapon the way she did. But in a fantasy, we don't have to really question that too hard.
Yeah. And pretty much spits in Lloyd's way, so I gave you VD.
Okay, so Dana's amazing. I want to talk a little. Now I want to go to Lloyd now. First, I want to talk about him in this chapter, and then we can talk about him as a whole.
Yeah.
Lloyd Henreid is a bad person. He has done very bad things.
Very bad.
I struggled with this chapter a little bit because throughout this entire book, I have been able to see the little bit of good in Lloyd.
The little flaw in the stone.
Yeah, exactly. And
the yin and the yang, whatever metaphor you want to use.
It was hard for me at some points in this book because I kind of wanted to go in there and say, Dana, he's bad, but he's not really that bad.
Did it have to be Lloyd?
Yeah, but from her perspective, yeah, he's the
worst. Yeah,
or he's the devil's right hand man anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about Lloyd. He's another one of those examples of the little holes that get poked in Flag's power, and he's one of the first ones to start to see it when he notices that Flag doesn't trust him with everything. He's dividing his information up. He's not putting all his eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. He's noticing that some of the followers that Flag has attracted are either abandoning him or messing up in very catastrophic ways. We will talk about that when we get to Trashy.
Lloyd is another one, not as strong as Larry, but he does have one of the better arcs throughout the entirety of the story, where you see him in book 1, mm-hmm. He's really a super fuck up, and then he kind of finds himself more in book 2 and finds a purpose, and you see like a lot of the good in him, because yes, he's a right hand man to a very evil being, but
they're still human beings,
right? He's found a leadership role, he's found a purpose, he's organizing this community of people, he's very proud of the school that they're running for the kids. He really takes pleasure in the other people. He has friends. I like all the good things that happened to Lloyd in Las Vegas.
There was even that little part where he talks about how he thinks better now.
Yeah, he thinks more clearly.
Yeah, and that's maybe due to Flag's power, and maybe it's just due to being given a little bit of responsibility and a little bit of trust. I'd say it's probably more of a supernatural explanation.
Yeah. But you could interpret it either way.
And that's part of the thing is, when the devil gives you these little gifts, they seem so great because you're just getting that little piece you've always missed.
Right.
And part of the little piece he's always missed, you can go all the way back to that rabbit he let starve to death, mm-hmm. was just remembering stuff.
Yeah.
He carries around a little notebook now to write stuff down. Mm-hmm. And he's more in control of himself, and that's why he keeps siding with Flag.
His arc kind of comes to a crossroad in book 3, where, as you said, he's noticing that Flag's team is kind of falling apart. Flag mm-hmm. isn't as powerful as he thought he was. He has the choice. He can go with Whitney and I think it was Jan or Jen and the others.
Yeah, I guess a small group.
And he can leave with them, or he can stick with Flag. And even though, morally speaking, he kind of makes the wrong decision to stay with this evil person, mm-hmm. I can also kind of respect it in a point, because he's not abandoning Las Vegas and the people there and the community that he's helped build and create.
I would say loyal to a fault. Mm-hmm. He's got this sense that this was the one person who ever gave him a chance. And so even if they lose, he has to see it through to the end.
Yeah, and he says that explicitly. Without Flag, I would have died in that jail cell. So regardless of how this goes down, I'm going to go down with Flag.
And part of that's a little sad. It was really sad in the Glenn chapter.
Yeah. You don't get any inner dialogue from Lloyd when Trash Man comes up with the bomb. Larry said, "Oh, thank God." I would think Lloyd probably had a similar thought.
Yeah, he's like, at least it's done.
Yeah, at least it's done. I'm going to die, but Flag was bad anyway. This is probably how it was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Lloyd has one of the saddest stories, I would say, but...
I agree.
Okay, so we did talk a lot about Trash Can Man earlier. So is there anything else that you wanted to add to Trash Can Man?
I don't know. I think we covered him pretty extensively just as we were talking about these other characters. He's definitely the most unexpected, necessary character to this narrative.
Right.
I still cannot believe that the kid chapter was cut.
Right. So if you look at him, all that you get from him is his first chapter in book 1. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the entire kid chapter is cut from book 2, or if you get where Trash Can Man is actually in Vegas, and he interacts with Lloyd and there's the crucifixion. That may have been in the original story.
Yeah.
But even if it is, all you get is that first chapter in book 1, that part in book 2, and then his parts in book 3. Like, it's not a lot of pages. It's not a lot of ink spilt.
In book 3, there's a scene, and it turns out to be super important. He comes back to he goes off into the desert, and he keeps finding these toys, and he brings them back to show them off. He finds, I think it's not a firecracker, it's one of those, it's like a bomb.
Yeah.
It burns at an intense heat, he's playing with it, and he's showing it off, and then people kind of tease him a little bit, like back when he was in his old hometown, saying, oh, if you play with fire, you wet the bed, and they're just ribbing him, because they see him as, like, their friend. He's, like, the cute little mascot.
Right.
But in his head, that causes him to sort of snap a little bit. Don't ask me about that burnt-up pension check. He plants bombs, not just in a bunch of oil trucks.
Helicopters.
He does it to the helicopters. He completely kills all the pilots. It destroys all of Randall Flagg's plans to invade early and destroy Boulder. And it makes it so he has to put it off to at least spring, because if they try to invade now, they're going to get caught in the winter snow.
In the same way that Gollum derails Sauron's plans by bringing Frodo and Sam into Mordor and guiding them to Mount Doom.
Now, there is one little part that I didn't like in the book. And that was, I'm reading it, and they talk, and Trash Can Man's like thinking about he got stung by a scorpion in the finger, and he's like, did that start to mess with my mind a little bit? And I'm sitting there reading it going, I don't think that was necessary. I don't think you needed an additional explanation for why he would do something to hurt Randall Flagg's operations.
Right.
The fact that he was just unstable and someone said the exact wrong thing, I felt that was enough.
Me too.
I think that maybe King thought maybe it wasn't enough, so he, like, I need to add just a little bit because people aren't going to believe he just betrayed them.
Or maybe he just wanted out a scorpion.
Sometimes scorpions are cool.
They are.
I also like, he goes and he sniffs out a nuclear bomb, because he's like, if I find, like, the biggest bomb, Flag will forgive me for destroying everything. Him retrieving the bomb, at least to me, felt very much like a descent into hell. It was like going to hell and back for his master. He comes back, his teeth are falling up, he's shitting out blood.
He's lost all his hair.
His skin is completely blackened.
Is there an illustration?
I'm not sure if it was supposed to be him, but I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be him. Yeah, it's poosicles.
So for the listeners, I've been listening to the audiobook, but I have a printed copy with me.
Yeah, there it is.
And I've been trying to look up the illustrations as I go. Ugh.
Covered in boils.
Ugh.
I love this artwork.
Yeah, Bernie Wrightson is great. Okay, so Tom Collins.
M-O-O-N. That spells MVP. Yeah. I've been waiting all night to make that joke.
I was shocked by how cool Tom was and how put together. And not even just, even if you set aside the whole where he finds Stu and rescues Stu and all, before that, like, he's the only spy that gets in. You assume he gets some information. Of course, it's not relevant anymore because Las Vegas blows up. He's the only one who escapes. So my first question is, and maybe this is obvious, and maybe it's not, but why was Flag able to see Dana and the judge with his eye, but he was not able to see Tom?
Okay, I don't think the book makes it 100% clear.
No.
It seems to imply it was because he's mentally impaired.
Yes.
But you could also probably interpret it as Nick looking after him from the afterlife. You could maybe interpret it as the only thing on his mind because he's hypnotized is the moon. Yep. So that's all Flag can see. But I do think that the strongest, at least just reading the book, points to is because his brain doesn't work like other people.
Yeah, I think that's the level one interpretation, is that's what makes him different from the judge and from Dana. So that's why Flag can't find him. Mm-hmm. And I like everything else you said, in that it's probably all of those things.
Yeah, it's a little column A through C.
Going through book 3, before it got to the point where it actually explained how Flag and the Eye worked, I thought it was probably some sort of telepathic thing where Flag was able to hear the thoughts of Dana and the judge, and that's how he determined they were spies. But because Tom is programmed, he didn't get anything from him telepathically.
Yeah.
Turns out that isn't it, or at least that was nothing like that was ever mentioned.
That would have been a simpler explanation, but this is a King book. So.
Right. Tom also really falls into that whole theme of predestination, where he knew it was time to leave. He knew, I need to go to sleep now, I need to wake up and I need to walk now, I need to not go this way because Flag's men are that way. That whole guiding hand of God or Nick, that theme really goes well with Tom's story.
And while some of the language might be insensitive and outdated, I do think the way Tom is written is very good.
Right, and we said in the last episode, King uses the R word a lot, and it's not great, but this is a positive
representation
of a mentally handicapped character from the 70s.
Pulling through and pretty much just saving the day.
Yeah, and this isn't Of Mice and Men, and we won't get into that and how that book ends.
Yeah.
But King kind of made the mentally handicapped guy the hero.
Yeah, and it comes across as believable, at least to me.
Yeah.
It works for the way not just the book is written, but how I feel those characters will naturally progress.
And even more so than Stu, who we agree that Stu is kind of the Bill Denborough of this book,
Mm-hmm.
but Stu would have died without Tom.
Yeah.
He only got home because of Tom. And Tom probably could have made it home without Stu.
I just want to add, really quick, that the follow-up MVP is Kojak the dog.
Yeah, Kojak is great.
He also helps save Stu, but there's not a lot to go with over him. I just wanted to put that out there.
We're both big animal people, both dogs and cats. We're not picking sides.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love Kojak. Great. Is Kojak best boy or is Cujo best boy?
I don't know, but next time on Death Battle, they're gonna fight it out.
Really?
No.
Or Church. We should do like a top 10 King animal characters.
Yeah, that will be for our pre-show next time.
What's the name of the bull from Pet Sematary that like went crazy?
I'm gonna have to look that one up.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we'll do a special mini episode on that. Okay. Fran
is Fran. She continues down the path of where I thought she was going to go, but I hope she wouldn't. I know that she was pregnant, so you're kind of written into a corner in what she can do mobility-wise, and I respect that he didn't try to turn her into a ninja while she's 9 months pregnant.
Right.
But at the same time, it just gives her a whole lot of nothing to do, except at the very end, she's waiting in the hospital because she's had her baby, and big surprise, it's infected with Captain Trips, and you don't know if it's going to die, if this is going to be the end of humanity.
Mm-hmm. And
it's a nice final little kind of what's going to happen scare. It's very human. I can imagine being a parent in a hospital, you find out your kid is sick, and you're just waiting for the doctor to tell you they're going to die. But that's all stuff around Fran. It's nothing about her personally. And the last thing she does is go to Stu and go, I really want to leave Boulder because I really don't like how big it's getting and how it's changing. And all I could do was sit there and think, oh great, you think that old problems are cropping up, so you're going to run away from them. What a thing to do.
Well, I am extremely unsatisfied and unhappy with how Fran is portrayed in Book 2 and in Book 3 after I liked her so much in Book 1.
Such a strong start.
Right. But I do kind of like a little bit that she was the one to suggest to leave, because it's established right off the bat in Book 1 that she's not a follower and she's not afraid to say, just because Jesse got her pregnant and
Mm-hmm.
Jesse offers to marry her, and that's probably the safe and right quotation mark decision, I don't have to do that. And similarly, at the end of Book 3, we've defeated the bad guy, now we're building this new community in Boulder, and we should stay here and be a part of this. And she's like, no, I don't want to do that. Let's leave. So I think that part kind of fits her character a little bit, but it doesn't in any way or form make up for how dissatisfied I am with her. Just not even, it's not like she was in the story and I didn't like how her character turned out. She's just not in it. She is not in Book 3 until like the last 3 chapters, which, as we said earlier, are after the climax, and essentially after the book itself. The story is already over. We're just kind of in this super long epilogue.
A very long epilogue. I would have liked time to be spent elsewhere. I do appreciate the little Captain Trips scare at the end.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, but would I have replaced it with other stuff? Probably.
I don't want to rant too much on Fran because we spent a lot of time talking about her in the last episode. So,
yeah.
Harold and Nadine. I'll let you start on this one because I know how you feel about Harold.
I will say that Harold's death was very well deserved.
Yes.
On their way to Vegas, They slip on a unexpected oil spill.
Unexpected to Harold.
Yeah. He breaks his leg, and Nadine goes, "This was my way of having you die. Randall Flagg's way would have been way worse. You have bullets in your gun, you can kill yourself." It's a big betrayal. It's very biblical in that sense of he who lives by the sword will die by the sword.
Right.
It's very biblical in that people get their just desserts sense.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very unsatisfying just based off of how much he was built up throughout the rest of the book. I do like that he stays Harold to the very end.
Right.
He writes a bunch of philosophical nonsense, and then he reads it back to himself and goes, "This is bullshit."
He finishes his incel manifesto.
He's sitting there like, "Oh, I was misled," and I'm like, yeah, you were. You could at least apologize. You know, there's a
he does own up a little bit in that he says that he acknowledges what he did and he did it of his own free will.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was expecting "I'm sorry, I don't expect to be forgiven."
Right.
But he can't even bring himself to do that much. I will say that him putting the gun in his mouth and finally taking that leap, you know, he talks about how kids would bully him because he would always chicken out of stuff. So he finally is able to shoot himself. I'm like, okay. I was expecting a little bit more out of Harold. Maybe that's just because till the very end, I relate to the not so murderous parts of Harold.
Right.
And I see that kind of kinship of, I just want you to become better because it's possible. I know it's possible. I've been there.
So Harold's death was kind of the first note in my disappointment in book 3.
Yeah.
Where it basically the exact same thing that you said, where so much ink is spilt on him in book 1 and book 2, and then he just dies. I thought he was gonna play a bigger role, and I don't want to make it sound like I had an expectation and King didn't meet my expectation, therefore I don't like it.
Yeah.
But based on the amount of time we spent with him in the first 2 books, I really feel like he should have had a larger role in the last book.
I can agree to that. It does kind of fit part of the book in that sense that death can literally come anytime.
Right, which fits the post-apocalyptic themes that are common in so many other of these types of stories where you think a character is really important and bam, something happens and they're dead.
But
that happens a lot in Walking Dead, for example.
But at the same time, I still wanted more, so what are you going to do?
Exactly. Something I did really like about Harold's death is that his situation and Stu's situation, and them both being romantic rivals for Fran, they parallel each other. They're both going with other people to Las Vegas. They both take a fall. They both break their legs. They're both abandoned by the rest of the people in their group. Harold decides to take his life. Stu decides not to take his life. Harold dies. Stu lives.
Yeah, in that same sense, they're reflections of each other because Harold dies because he's opted to go after that bad reflection of power, where Stu goes, well, this was all a test by whatever version of God you want to call it, and decides, no, I have to have my faith that this was meant to happen.
Right.
This is what happens when you have those kind of dual ideologies colliding.
That was powerful writing.
Yeah.
And then Nadine, my disappointment with Nadine's role in book 3 is very similar to my disappointment with Harold's. Maybe you can mash them together because she's built up and her story is talked about so much in book 2, and then you get this gruesome rape scene, and then she dies.
Yeah. Something right out of the Blue Girl.
Yeah, and what did you think about the end of Nadine's story?
I expected it to be something along those lines of a flag to kill her. I don't know if I expected her to goad him into it or to be even able to do that.
She did get, it's sort of similar to Dana. She did get the better of him a little bit at the end.
And that was kind of part of that progression of Flag losing control of the situation. She was like the cherry on top. She was the unexpected cherry because up until then, he thought he was getting everything he wanted. So I think that's all I have to say on Nadine. I don't think I got any more.
And wrapping up with characters here, of course, is Randall Flagg, which we have talked about in relation to every other character. So I don't know how much deeper we need to go into Flagg himself, but I do want to say in book 1 and 2, we have this buildup of him as like this all-powerful, omnipotent being, and then book 3 is just kind of him getting fucked one time after another until he gets blown up.
I don't know how to feel about Flag. There are parts of him as a villain I really like. There's this fine line between when you're using sort of a cosmic villain or a villain like, let's say, Sauron, that's supposed to be emblematic of every problem. There's this fine line you walk between giving the reader too much information and too little information. The example I came to in my head, because it's another King book, was Pennywise It.
Right.
In that book, I think I was given too much. I always felt that knowing it came from outer space and that it can change shape was enough. I didn't need any more than that. With Flag, I'm sitting around like, I know he exists in other books, but only because of Ryan. But if I didn't know that, I would be kind of disappointed because I was expecting some sort of explanation.
I haven't read the Dark Tower series. I've seen the movie, which we won't get into, but I have read the other novel where he is the main villain of, which is The Eyes of the Dragon, which is a fantasy novel that King wrote for his daughter. I'm going to give you a little bit of a description of Flag in that book without giving any spoilers, kind of book jacket-esque description.
Okay.
So it takes place not on Earth, in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Where, in a kingdom where the king is kind of incompetent, and the opposing forces here, our protagonists are the king's 2 sons, who are going to inherit the kingdom from him when he dies, and the antagonist is the dark wizard Flag.
Okay.
Who is the king's advisor, who we find out is trying to advise the king into bad decisions and basically, trying to push the kingdom towards war, trying to create a situation where an epidemic could break out in the kingdom. He thrives on chaos and death and sadness and fear, and he tries to manipulate the king from behind the scenes to have these things happen, and, to be thwarted by the king's son, primarily his first son. And without getting into any kind of spoilers, you do find out that Flag is kind of this immortal cosmic character that can kind of float between worlds and pops up in other stories. I think we are going to have to read The Dark Tower or The Eyes of the Dragon at some point in the history of this podcast, just so we can get more into the story of Flag.
Okay, I'll do that.
But yeah, we've been talking about Flag for the past hour in relation to all the other characters.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's move away from characters. Let's talk about the spooky scares. What was the scariest part of book 3 to you?
Okay, this is going to sound super lame. It happens in the Judge chapter.
Okay.
He's sitting in a hotel room alone. He has some arthritis pain. And all of a sudden, a crow just starts pecking at a window. Tap, 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 tap. That is something right out of nightmares that I've had, where birds are just at my window, tapping at the window, trying to get in. And you see it, and you're like, why is that bird messing with my window? And it had this real surreal dream logic of, well, he knows it's Randall Flag, but how does he know that? The bird's grinning at him. I know that the bird outside my windows are evil in my dream, but I don't know why. I just know that they're evil.
Right.
And it crosses that line so wonderfully that the judge himself convinces himself that it had to be a dream as he pulls the gun on the crow, and he knows I could kill Randall Flag right now, but the safety was on. And that's another part of a Flag, little holes in him messing up. But just little onomatopoeias of noise, horror novels too, really get to me. So I just keep imagining the little tapping of the bird watching me with those dead bird eyes. I hate birds.
It echoes Salem's Lot, with the vampires coming to the window and trying to get invited.
There is a reason my windows are always locked.
So, right after I read that, I went somewhere with Beck and the kids, and we pulled up into the parking lot of the store or whatever we were going, and as soon as we stopped, a crow came down from a power line and landed right next to our car. And I had just read that part. And I'm like, oh.
It's weird because any other time I would tell you that crows are my favorite bird.
They are pretty.
But right now, after reading that, I'm like, I'm going to have to take a break from you, crows. I'll go back to cardinals for a minute.
So, continuing on that chapter, the descriptions of the gunshot wounds that the judge experiences, and also Glenn's gunshot wounds, were super visceral.
Yeah, I have seen gunshot victims, unfortunately, and that was super real.
Yeah.
It's not great.
That was scary. We also talked about Dana and how she takes her own life and slices her own throat with a glass.
That was intense.
A lot of the scares in this chapter are visceral things like that, like the description of how Ralph and Larry were going to be literally pulled apart.
Yeah, it was a very Saw the final chapter.
Right. And also the descriptions of Trash Can Man falling apart from the radiation sickness.
Super. We talked about that a little bit, but that was super gross. It's very body horror-esque.
Normally after scares, we talk about, our least favorite things and our criticisms and what we would change. We're going to kind of table that to the end when we go over our final thoughts on the book again, because
I also think we've gone over that a lot just throughout our rants.
We've definitely been more negative in this episode compared to the other two episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll come back to that. But talking about sex in Book 3 of The Stand, this is one of the big emblematic scenes from this book for me, is the sex or rape scene between Randall Flagg and Nadine. What?
I remember I was texting you. I was like, what did she expect? And you were like, I don't think she expected demon cock. And I'm like, after all these dreams and visions, that's 100% what I would have thought was coming after me.
Yeah, well...
And they get super descriptive. They even talk about how it feels when he's coming inside her.
It's molten pig iron.
And I'm just like, man, that's great. Can I get another chapter of this? I have very different reactions to this scene. I thought it was fucking gross, but funny at the same time.
It was definitely gross. It was definitely unsettling.
Yeah.
I think I might find it funny on a second read-through.
You got to remember, Ryan's a good boy and I'm a sicko, so...
I'm a little bit of a sicko, too. For scenes like that, for me to find humorous, they have to be so absurdly off the wall, like the kid shoving his gun up Trash Can Man's rectum.
Yeah, I thought... I was picturing it super absurd, but maybe that's just the way my brain imagined it. So...
It was a rough scene. So other instances... So we talked a little bit about Dana and Lloyd, and Dana using sex as a weapon, and maybe it's not super realistic, but it did show a source of strength for her as a character.
I do like how King described her fake orgasms. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I can relate to being a bad lover.
So in Book 3, we get the return of Lori, who is the girl that Nick has sex with in Book 2, but ultimately he and Tom kind of abandon her.
Yeah.
And she interacts with Rat.
Wholly racial and sensitive stereotypes, Batman.
Yeah.
I am the Nigerian wielding a sword.
So
talking in my thick accent.
In 2021, one of the major criticisms of this book is that the cast is not racially diverse. Basically, they're all white except for Mother Abigail, who is kind of the magical black woman stereotype.
Yeah.
The voodoo woman, but in kind of a Christian voodoo woman.
In a Christian sense.
Yeah. And then the other black character is the Rat Man, who dresses like a Nigerian pirate and refers to himself in the third person. And
I am not one of those people who need racial diversity, and I am a white guy, so I have been represented. But at the same time, when I see that, I'm like, ooh boy, maybe don't do that one.
I do.
I cracked up when I read it, but I don't know if that's the reaction that was going.
It's not even... The issue isn't so much that the book isn't racially diverse, but the issue is that the two non-white characters are terrible stereotypes.
On top of that, you also had the ex-black Marines dressing up in loincloths executing the white soldiers.
Yeah.
That was back all the way in Book 1.
Right. And sadly, this book was published in the 70s, and then there was a second edition, an expanded edition published in 1990, basically an opportunity to change some of this stuff, and he didn't. Granted, that was 31 years ago.
I do think, I'm not one of those people that needs an author to evolve with their audience, but I will say that King has done a very good job of doing that.
Right. If you read a more recent book of his, It's like black and white, night and day.
The only reason I bring these issues up is because I'm aware of modern sensibilities, and if people don't know about some of this stuff going in, they might, be taken aback. I mean, I was taken aback. I laughed about it, but again, that's not poking fun of me or my history, so maybe that says something about me. I don't know.
Maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. And like you said earlier, we are two white guys, and we don't need any more representation because we've been represented pretty well through all the fiction and media that we've experienced.
And I'm not even against there being an occasional stereotype. It just felt like this book had its fair share of them, contrasted against the white people.
And I don't think it would have even been such a big deal of having Mother Abigail and the Rat Man in the book if they also just had a black character that wasn't a stereotype.
Yeah, that helps contrast stereotypes.
And also, race isn't core to any of the characters at all, so it would have done nothing really to the story to make Stu or Fran or any of them really a person of color.
Yeah.
Right. All right, but moving on. So what did you think about Lori and the Rat Man propositioning her? Like, you want to get out of here and have some fun with the Rat Man?
Yeah. No one wanted to have sex with the Rat Man, not even Lori, and I think that says something.
There was a point in the book where she said something like the Rat Man was the only person in Las Vegas that was too creepy for Lori to sleep with, except for maybe in a pinch.
Yeah.
So moving on from sex, normally we talk about religion here and how it's relevant to the story, and we've kind of been talking about that.
I think we've covered that from start to finish. The only thing I'd say is at the end of the book, instead of finishing up with the religious overtones, he instead goes back to those social undertones of people repeating the same mistakes. And I just really feel that you could have done both. You should have done both because you set yourself up to do both. But he kind of just drops religion right at the end.
Now we're going to kind of wrap up. And I want both of us to kind of give our final thoughts on book 3. And then we're going to give our final thoughts on The Stand, the novel as a whole.
Yeah.
So first, kind of after, whatever you said initially, plus this huge discussion we've had, what are your final thoughts on book 3 of The Stand?
I think book 3 is very good at setting up tension. I think it's very good at delivering a few scares. I think it fumbles the ball whenever it comes to some of its underlying themes. Again, I am not a critic. I just read books. But it really felt out of place towards the end, and it took me out of the story a little bit. I'd probably rate book 3. I'm probably rating book 3 the lowest just because of the ending.
I would agree.
People keep talking about the boulder in book 2, and I'm just like, I don't know, man. After that fumble, I'd probably change my jersey.
I think I like book 2 the best, but I could definitely see book 1 being, maybe the strongest written of the 3.
I think book one was such a great intro.
I became more invested personally in book 2.
Yeah.
I definitely agree that book 3 is my least favorite.
Yeah.
For me, initially, I was unsatisfied and not very happy with it. As I've reflected on it more, I think I'm seeing more of the good parts of book 3, but that doesn't change the fact that I was just, as a whole, kind of unsatisfied with a lot of the character arcs. Now, part of that is, we took a long time getting through this book, and because of that, I built up a lot of expectations in my head.
I feel that.
Yeah, about how things were going to go down with for the characters, and that really happened with none of them, except for maybe Larry.
Yeah.
So you could say that maybe I'm just upset because it didn't end the way I wanted it to.
I don't even know how I wanted it to end.
Yeah,
but I feel like King set up a certain pathway, and then he just didn't follow through with it.
If I had to boil it down, I'd say that I have really 2 issues. One is that the amount of time that was spent on several characters in book 1 and 2 was not proportional to their role in the climax of the story or their end.
That makes sense.
I think the main one there would be Harold,
Mm-hmm.
but also Nadine, and even kind of Stu. Even though Stu is the one that lives,
Yeah,
he doesn't really have any action in book 3.
I agree with all that. I would love to hear contrasting opinions
Yeah.
if anybody wants to give us them, but this is just where I'm coming from, fresh off of it.
And then my second kind of issue is, like I said earlier, is the actual climax of the story with the execution of Ralph and Larry and the bomb and the hand of God. That all happens so quick.
Yeah.
I was in the climax and I didn't even know it
Yeah.
until it was basically over.
And then you're given a 100-page epilogue.
Yeah. So I'd say those are kind of my two...
Maybe not quite that long. You know what I mean.
It was long.
It was a long epilogue.
Those are kind of my two main issues.
Mm-hmm.
The Stand as a whole, the entire novel. What are your thoughts?
If I gave low marks to the last book, I would liken it to a student who had a very strong start of the year and then they just kind of cruised to get their grade. Overall, I'd say that this is a very effective book. I think it's a very relevant book. I think that it's ripe for interpretation and adaptation. I know there's already 2, but a book like this I think that you can do a lot with. I think it can inspire a lot. Overall, I'd probably give it a B.
I think I'm not so much on giving, books and movies grades or rankings, but B sounds about right. I think overall, I like The Stand.
Yeah.
If somebody said, would you recommend The Stand? I would say yes.
Oh, yeah. I would give it to them, but I would give them all those little warnings, like if you're sensitive to this, this, and this,
yeah,
be aware it is in the book. I'm not even one of those people who think that you should have to put trigger warnings on things. When it comes to me being personal, if somebody asked me, I'd be like, okay, well, I know you. Here's some stuff that's in the book.
Yeah, if you have like a sexual violence trigger, you want to go into this slow.
If you're sensitive to racial issues, maybe.
Yeah.
Even if you're just sensitive to mass death and disease, because that's a thing now.
Yeah, I think I might be sensitive to that now.
So
this would not be the first book I would recommend if somebody was getting into Stephen King, though.
I don't know if this would be in the top 5 I'd recommend.
No, it wouldn't be. Typically, it was my first book.
Yeah.
And I probably wouldn't recommend, even though it is my favorite, I probably wouldn't recommend it as the first one either. Mm-hmm. I think for me, if somebody wanted a introduction to Stephen King, I would go with Salem's Lot.
Salem's Lot would be my number one choice. I know I always say I have 2 answers, but my 2 answers are Salem's Lot and Carrie. Salem's Lot because I think it represents his work across the board the best.
Yep.
And Carrie because it's shorter and some people don't have long attention spans.
Carrie is short compared to the other books. It also just moves fast.
Yeah.
And
so if you want like a little quick King read to see if you might like his other books, that's the one I'd give you.
And also, if you have a history with like YA novels, or if you've gone to high school,
I would say it's a YA novel written well.
Yeah, it's Carrie is very easily related. Now, it's about a girl who has problems at home and problems in school.
Yeah. But for The Stand, I would recommend it to certain people.
Yeah.
I would probably recommend it across the board, but not as a first King book. That probably, I don't know if it'd make the top 10. I'd have to sit there and make a list.
I would say, though, that I might be excited to go through The Stand again after some years.
Books that I grade a B are generally ones I'd read again.
And the thing here is that I think maybe a lot of my disappointments in this first read are because I had some expectations.
Mm-hmm.
When I go through it a second time and I don't have those expectations because I know how the book ends, I know everything that happens,
yeah,
I might be able to enjoy it more. Wrapping up, so Stephen King said in the introduction to this book, this is the number 1 book that he is asked about more than It, The Shining, Pet Sematary, Carrie, Salem's Lot, more than all of those.
That surprises me, honestly.
This is what he says is his fans' favorite book of his. It's the one that he's asked about most by fans in interviews and at conventions and all of that sort of stuff.
Okay.
So if we're looking at his bibliography, like his most iconic books, which I would probably say his most iconic books are Carrie, Salem's Lot, The Shining, The Stand, Cujo.
Yeah, probably Cujo.
Misery. Like, if we're looking at like all of the Pet Cemetery, if we're looking at all of those books, where does The Stand, without getting too specific, where does it kind of rank for you, just generally?
And my like personal enjoyment or how I think it's written.
Personal enjoyment.
It would be at the bottom of the list of all of those, except maybe Cujo, because I can never seem to finish it.
I don't know if it would be the absolute bottom for me, but it's definitely one of the lesser ones.
Mm-hmm.
My three favorites, as I said earlier, are The Dead Zone, Salem's Lot, and It.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of the books I read, like I loved Cujo.
Yeah.
I got all the way through it. The Shining is an amazing novel.
Mm-hmm.
Pet Cemetery is the scariest book I've ever read.
That is also probably the scariest book I've ever read.
And
Part of that's just personal preference. Post-apocalyptic things aren't things I go out of my way for, but horrors happening in small towns is like my personal favorite subgenre, and King has a lot of that.
right, which is why Salem's Lot and It are my favorites.
Yeah.
I would say that post-apocalyptic stories are probably one of my favorite genres of horror.
Mm-hmm.
I've got the complete set of Walking Dead comics right behind us.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Jack London's novel, The Scarlet Plague, which is about essentially like a fever that just wipes out 99% of humanity.
Oh, so it's The Stand.
Yes. I'm pretty sure it was written before.
I have no idea, just...
Scarlet Plague. Yeah, it was published in 1912.
Alrighty. I mean, I'll add that to my list too.
Yeah, and actually that's one we might even want to cover on the show because it's short. Like, I think the audiobook is like 3 hours.
That's pretty short.
Yeah, so it's a great story, and it was such a shock for me because Jack London is the guy who wrote White Fang and The Call of the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of, associate him with like as a naturalist and writing books about nature and wilderness and such. But it's very similar to The Stand, or should I say The Stand is very similar to The Scarlet Plague. Anyway, we might cover that book at some point.
We're on a tangent again.
I like this genre. I like zombies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing for me. Night of the Living Dead is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. I think one of the reasons why I personally don't rank The Stand as high as some of these other people might is I didn't have a real connection with any of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
There are some characters that I really liked. Nick, I really liked. Tom, I really liked Fran at the beginning. Stu is a good character, but I didn't have like a deep connection or could relate to any of these characters like the way that I related to several characters in the Losers Club.
You didn't find your Harold.
Yeah, I didn't have a Harold in this book. Maybe in a second read, I will,
Mm-hmm.
and that'll change things for me. But characters are big for me, and there wasn't a Jack Torrance character in this book like in The Shining, where you spend the entire book in Jack Torrance's head and can see his entire story from A to Z at, I don't know, I think I'm ranting now, so I'm probably going to have to stop, but
You're fine, man.
I like this book. I'm going to read it again. I would recommend it to people. I think it's a little overrated.
Overrated is probably the term I would use. I am sorry, all Stephen King fans. Please don't hate me.
I kind of like that we're starting with a book that we both thought is a little overrated, because you're getting to see us be critical without just bashing it.
Yeah, especially because I think we started off liking it so much.
And I think if we would have started with something like The Shining or It would have been a lot of gushing.
Yeah, you would have got to hear us be fanboys for, well, how long are our episodes? Hour and a half.
Yeah, something like that. So speaking of that, we should probably wrap it up. So we are going to cover the adaptations before we stop with a stand. Neither of us have seen either miniseries. Neither of us have read the comics prior to this. I just started reading the comics, and I gotta say, I'm really impressed by the comics.
I've seen the artwork on just Google Images.
They're beautiful.
I think I sent it to you back when we first started the book, and I was just like, man, that is so gross. I love it.
So next episode, we are going to be covering the first couple episodes from the Stand 1990 miniseries. We're going to spend a couple episodes on that. Then we're going to do the 2020 miniseries, and then we'll probably wrap up the Stand by covering all of the comics in one episode.
Yeah.
And then do we want to tell everybody what our next book will be after the Stand so people can get that and start reading?
Yeah, I think that's actually a good idea because we'll have some episodes where we're buffering through these adaptations. And if anybody wants to grab our next book and get a little bit of a head start, I think that's a great idea.
So if King is the master of horror, who is the Alighieri to his Mozart in modern horror terms?
In the popular opinion, there would be Dean Koontz. He is Diet Stephen King.
So we are going to be reading Phantoms by Dean Koontz. I've never read this book. You have?
I still have nightmares about this book, and I will not spoil it for Ryan, but I recently had that same nightmare again.
So without going on a big rant, I am not very experienced with Dean Koontz. I've only read 2 books, The Taking, and I think it was called Darkness Falls.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't particularly love or hate either of those books, so I'm excited to dive into a Koontz book that you're vouching for that is very good.
I am vouching for it, particularly because there's a lot of parallels between that and Stephen King's It, and
Right.
I'm hoping that you notice them.
And spoiler alert, we are going to cover It after Phantoms,
Yay!
which, as I've probably, in these 3 episodes, I've probably said 27 times, it is my favorite. And we've both read it. So we started with The Stand that neither of us has read. Then we're going to go to Phantoms, which only Daniel has read. Then we will cover It, which we have both read, and we might also have a third person covering It with us. And then we haven't decided what yet, but our 4th book will be something that I've read that Daniel hasn't.
I'm excited. I can't wait to find out what it is.
Yeah. And we're probably going to, and of course we're going to be breaking that up with covering the various adaptations, the film of Phantoms, the various adaptations of It. I would love like a long comic adaptation of It.
I would really like someone maybe like Junji Ito to do
Oh
Stephen
my gosh.
King's It, because I think he could draw those visceral, corny 40s Wolfman, but
Yep.
in a super creepy way. If you haven't read Junji Ito's Frankenstein, do it.
I haven't. I read Ito, but I have not read that one specifically. You know what would be great if we could do, but I can't find a subtitled version of it. There is a 50-episode Indian TV series adaptation of It.
I think we should watch it anyway.
I've watched unsubtitled clips of it on YouTube, and it is so terrible.
I want the Bollywood It.
It is so terrible.
We'll take a drink every time we laugh.
Okay, so, yep, I think we're going to wrap it up here. Daniel, thank you very much for joining me tonight, and thank you for reading The Stand with me.
Thank you, Ryan. I enjoyed it.
Well, that was horrendous. I would tell you boys good job, but the dryness of my sarcasm would likely evaporate all the moisture in both your bodies. Anyway, if you want to hear more of this, please subscribe to their YouTube channel by searching for The Horror of Babylon. You can follow them on Twitter at HorrorPod69. The Facebook page is under The Horror of Babylon. And on Instagram, these fools are The Horror of Babylon, one word. Reach their assuredly empty inbox at thehorrorofbabylonpodcast@gmail.com. You can also request their Discord server link via any other channel. And finally, if you are foolish enough to support this abomination financially, search for The Horror of Babylon on patreon.com. And God save your soul if you do.